Hello everyone, this is Alex Ipatov and this is the 7th video on the series about Rook endgames. In this video, I'm going to show the game played between two grandmasters, Francesco Rambaldi from Italy and Christian Bauer from France, played in the French League 2016, and it's based on our previous lesson where we examined the A and H pawn basics. In this game, you'll be able to see that even strong players can make mistakes if they are unaware of endgame principles. So in this position, it's black to move, and the French grandmaster Christian Bauer made a mistake. He played Rook g1, which gives away the win. The winning move would have been move h3, keeping the opponent's king still cut off on the e file, so the white king cannot go to e3 at the moment, while black threatens to play Rook g1 on the next move. So by playing h3 first, black would win a very important tempi. For example, the game could have continued king d2, Rook g1, Rook f8, king g2. The threat is h2. So if white plays king e2, then h2 wins. King h3. This idea we could have seen in our previous video number 6. And the king escapes from checks. h1 queen is the next move. Alright, so h3, king d2, rook g1, rook f8, king g2. What happens after rook g8 check? If rook g8 check, then king h1. The rook has to move, then h2. And we see that the white king is too far away and it cannot make it to f2 in just one move. King e3. This is example number 4 from the previous video number 6. The best defense for the defending side. But it doesn't help either. King g2, rook g8 check. We have to go to f1. Those who remember the previous video, they know why. Because we can go to h3, because whites can simply keep checking. And black would not have anything better than go back to g2. So after rook g8, king f1 is the best move. Rook f8 check, king e1, and now rook b8, threatening rook b1 mate. Now black can win by playing rook g3 check, king f4, and rook f3 check. We also discovered this idea in the previous video. So if white takes on f3, then h1 would come with a check, h1 queen is check, and black wins. And if white doesn't take on f3, then simply rook f1, preparing king f2, king g1. King g3 and h1 queen, black wins. So h3 would be winning, h3, king d2, rook g1, rook f8, king g2. Now let's check what happens after a minute, king e3. That would be the transposition into move rook g8. King e3, h2, check, king f1, and again we see exactly the same situation. Rook b8, and then check this, and rook f3 check. And we promote on h1 with the check if white takes on f3. So h3 would be winning, but in the game Grandmaster Bauer didn't do this. He played rook g1. This gave white a very important tempi to come closer with the king. In the game, Francesco Rambaldi played rook h8. Likewise, he could have played rook f8. For example, if h3, then king e2. Now we can see how important the tempi was. Rook a1 and then king f2, and we transpose to the first example from the previous video, video number 6. And as we know, one cutoff file is not enough. And rook f8. And the defensive method is to keep waiting with the king on squares f2, f1, and with the rook on f or g files. So rook f8 would be also a draw. In the game white played rook h8, it's still a draw, but it's a bit more difficult. Black played rook g4, threatening king g2 and h3. A very good idea, very typical. h3 would be bad because of king e2, rook g7, and king f2. And as we know, if the opponent's king is cut off on only 2 files, it's also not enough for a win. And this is a draw, because the king is cut off only on 2 files, the winning plan would be to bring the rook over to g1, but in that case the opponent's king would be just in time to come to f2, and that would be a draw. So rook h8, rook g4, king e3. A mistake by white this time. King e2 would make a draw. We can see it here. King g2, and now rook f8. We can see the idea of move king e2 in the following line. If h3, then rook f2. And after king g1, white does have check on f1, rook f1 check, because rook is protected by the king from e2. So king g2, rook f2 check, king g3, rook f3 check, king h4. And now rook f8. The maximum what black can get is rook and knight versus rook, which is also a draw. So now the threat is rook h8. So black can play h1 knight, but it's a draw, theoretical draw as well. So after rook g4, king e2 would be the drawing move. In the game, white play king e3. Now let's check another line after king e2, king g2, rook f8. We've checked h3, rook f2, check. Now let's check what happens after rook e4 check first, if black decides to cut off our king. King d3, rook e1, then white starts checking again, rook g8 check, and king d2, rook e7, rook h8, and we transpose to the example number 3 from the previous video, video number 6, from which we learned that if the opponent's king is cut off on 3 files, it's also not enough to win. Our winning plan would be to bring the rook over to g1 and go out of the corner with the king to g2, but the opponent's king would be just in time to come to f2 and prevent this idea. For example, rook a7, king e2, rook a1, king f2, and this is a draw. Alright, but let's see what happened in the game. In the game, Francesco Rambaldi played king e3, once again changing the evaluation. Now it's again winning for black, but favor for favor. Black made another mistake. He played h3, which is a draw. King g2 would have been an easy win, threatening h3 and preventing the white king from coming to f2 or f3. A very logical move. I guess the French grandmaster was in time trouble, that's why he didn't play this move. So rook f8 could have been possible, but then h3, rook f2, and king g1. And comparing to the move king e2 a few moves earlier, white does not have rook f1 check in this position because it's not covered by the king, it's too far. So then black simply threatens to play h2, h1. So king g2 would have ended the game right away. But what Christian Bauer did, he played h3 first, which gave an important tempo to white to bring the king closer to f file, and which is enough to make a draw. So rook g1, rook e8. Thanks to this mistake, the black king is unable to go out of the corner. So king h1, rook h8, h2, king f2. And now we transpose to example number 1 from our previous video, video number 6, which is a draw. Because we know that if the opponent's king is cut off only on 1 file, 2 files or 3 files, it's not enough for a win. In this case, it's cut off just on 1 file. So the draw was agreed in this game. What we learned from this game, we saw that even strong grandmasters can make mistakes if they are unaware about the Rook endgame principles and basics. Thank you for watching. It was Alex Ipatov.